Once we have some code ready for review, we need to actually submit it to the code review application. So let's say if you kind of followed with the previous video, you should know how to create a diff to submit for review. So I put that in the source directory, and it's just this right here. So let's just say this is the code file that we want to send for review. The Krita uses a service and website called identity.kde.org. Most of the websites that Krita uses will use the KDE login for everything. So once you create a KDE identity, it's going to help with doing a few different things. If you don't have an account, you actually need to see it over here with this register button. So just hit the register and then kind of fill it out, and it'll send you an email and do all the basic registration stuff. This identity site is also really useful if once we start needing to manage our SSH keys and once we need to get commit access. We're going to come back to this website eventually after we maybe did a few reviews and the developers liked us. The website that we'll actually do the review on is this. So I already have a KDE identity account, so that's kind of what this means here. So I switched over to fabricator.kde.org. So this is the project management system that Krita uses to manage a lot of its tasks. We have a lot of discussions over new features and user interface stuff. So this is kind of the central hub where we do a lot of our work and organize things. So I'm just going to sign in using my KDE identity here, and then I won't save it. And there's quite a few different reviews, and there's also a lot more projects that use this than just Krita. But we shouldn't have to worry about that for just doing this code review. So click on the code review tab on the left, and then we're going to do this option right here called create diff. So once we click that, we can kind of add our diff or code changes in two different ways. We can do this, but what I think is easier is just to browse, and we can actually click on the file. So I'm just going to go in the home, source, and then find our export diff file. So I'm just going to click on that, and then we can actually assign it to the Krita source code by clicking on the magnifying glass and then typing on the R37 Krita. So we select that, and that pops it up here. And then we just do create diff here. And even though we've kind of created it, we haven't technically, I don't know if we've technically created it. I guess we have. And then you can either update an existing one, but I mean, we're just making a new one, so we shouldn't have to worry. This is kind of just shows you a preview of what you're changing. You can hit continue, and then from here you can kind of fill this information out with what you're kind of planning on doing. So this is just a couple small changes for testing, and then summary is just added a couple variables, test plan, and then usually with this is you kind of just say, what did you do to make sure this did not break Krita? So what different paths did you take? So a lot of time, like for this one, I could just say, well, I compiled it, and it seems to work okay still. Sometimes when you're doing this, if it's more complicated, say if I was doing some stuff with like a text editor, I could say something like, well, I edited the text, then canceled, then I edited the text, then hit OK, and then we can kind of just go through some different scenarios of all of the things that you tried to do to break it, just to make sure that this also helps developers a lot with certain areas that are maybe more complex. Sometimes just looking at the code, it's difficult to tell what part of Krita this is going to affect. So kind of adding a test plan in here kind of helps other people know what they need to test. And then for reviewers, you can just type Krita here. And then repository, you can do the same thing. And then that's really all you have to worry about. I mean, maybe sometimes in patches, if you're talking with a developer specifically, you can add people you can actually add people to reviewers, or you can add maybe other subscribers that need to check it out that aren't programmers. But when you're first starting out with code stuff, you generally don't have to worry about that. So yeah, usually from here you can just do kind of create revision, and then it'll create it. You can kind of, if you want to do some changes with it, you can kind of just do edit. You can edit these at any time. If a programmer talks about something with, say, that the title isn't very descriptive, or maybe you need to add some more details into the summary. So usually what happens at this point is sometimes the developers know that the code patch is there, but sometimes they don't. It can be good sometimes to go into a chat room or something or the forum and say, hey, I made some changes, check it out, and then you can just give them this link. So that can sometimes be helpful because the developers get pretty overloaded sometimes with all of their tasks. So it can be pretty easy to miss this stuff for them sometimes. And then from there, pretty much what you'll see is there's kind of a history of all of the stuff that goes on right here. So eventually you'll start seeing more comments and maybe some information about changes you need to make or improvements you need to make. And then you either need to update the diffs if there's problems. So say for example that you did this and then there's some problems with it, you can kind of go back and create a new diff, maybe add some more commits with your fixes, and then you can just do update diff right here. And then you kind of just follow the same path that we did, that you kind of upload it, and then I think it does this automatically, but instead of when it gets to the point when it says new revision, you can specify that you just want to update one of your existing ones. So you just select that, and then when that's done, it will just kind of update here. And then so that's kind of it for the most part. And then when you're done with it, you either you can kind of change in right now you can only abandon revision because it wasn't approved, but if it was approved and you were done with it, you could actually, there's more options here that allows you to kind of close the ticket saying it was shipped out. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of how to do code reviews in Krita with that process.